Hello, here's a new educational chess game against an opponent rated 1563. I'm playing black. We're playing a 15-minute game, and he starts with the pawn to e4. I'll respond with the Sicilian defense, pawn to c5. My favorite defense is the Caro-Kann defense with c6. But sometimes I also play the Sicilian or the French defense with e6. And here he plays b4, which is called the Sicilian gambit. A gambit in chess is when your opponent sacrifices a pawn in order to gain compensation. And here, his idea, if I take, is to establish a strong pawn center. But I'm going to take anyway. He plays a3, and I'm going to take. So he's going to recapture, and now he's a pawn down. But on the other hand, I no longer have my pawn de colonne c, whereas he still has his to support the center, plus his rook is on a 3. You have to watch out for it, because sometimes it can slide along the third rank to join the attack on the king side. So you have to be careful about that. Here you feel like pushing the pawn e to attack the rook, but if I play a move like e5, I give up the d5 square to my opponent. He'll move his rook and later he'll play on that square, as well as with the bishop on the diagonal. So I'm rather looking at e6. I attack his rook. Let's see what he decides to do with it. He plays knight c3, and this is interesting because he lets me take the rook to recapture with the dark squared bishop and hinder my development. Maybe afterwards he'll look for moves like e5, knight e4, and chercher l'infiltration sur les dark squares with knight d6 échec et le bishop en embuscade. I don't want to take his rook. I'm going to develop with knight c6. I didn't want to give him too much development with bishop takes, the bishop on the diagonal. Sure, I can play d6, but at some point, e5 can come with the knight or the other knight supporting the push to e5. I could run into problems. I think it was possible to take his rook. But after all, I'll save that capture for later, for a better opportunity. Unless he moves it, but he'll lose a tempo moving it. You always have to understand what you're capturing, but also what you're giving up. And when I take his rook, sure, I capture his rook, but I give him the bishop of black square. With better development, the pawn on d4, the bishop of black square, the knight on c3. By the way, I think that instead of knight to c6, if I had taken his rook, bishop takes, and then I played d6 to try to block, I think knight to b5 would have really hurt me. With the double attack on the d6 pawn, which I can't really defend. If I don't want to lose it, I have to push and open up the black diagonal for him. And then he comes into d6 with check. It's too risky. He just played rook to b3. Now I'm going to play knight to f6. I'm not afraid of e5 because of knight to e5. And having my knight on f6 can support the d5 push. For now, I'm not getting sidetracked by going after his rook with knight to d4 or knight to a5. I'm going to leave his rook there. I have an extra pawn. I'm looking to continue my development. d5 takes, knight takes, maybe recapture with the queen. Okay, I'll push d5. I can also recapture with the pawn, freeing my bishop. We'll see. But I have the a7 pawn, a passed pawn, far advanced, which is a big asset in endgames. Not in the middle game, because right now I don't really have a chance to advance and hope to promote to a queen. But in the endgame, it could be interesting. So he plays bishop g5. He's pinning me, so I'm definitely going to unpin myself. Bishop a7, and kingside castling could happen. So I have an extra pawn. I've placed my pawn on d5. I'm ready to castle. In the end, the position is less dangerous than if I had gone after his rook. He plays knight f3. Can I exchange the queens? The capture, if he recaptures with the knight, maybe knight takes, pawn takes, exchange the queens. And I have an extra pawn in the endgame. Now, on the capture, he might want to play bishop takes knight first. I recapture, I attack his knight so he can recapture. But I'll have the pair of bishops, an extra pawn and the pair of bishops. So I take on e4. So either I manage to exchange the queens and have an extra pawn in the endgame, or I don't exchange the queens, but he'll have to give up the pair of bishops. And the dark squared bishop, I'm very happy with that. So he plays knight takes e4. So now I'll be able to exchange queens. On bishop takes, if I want to exchange queens, I have to recapture with the knight and not with the queen, because then he could take on e4. I recapture with the knight. Now he has nothing better than to take. He has to get his piece back. And we exchange queens. And I have a better pawn structure, the passed pawn, and here the isolated pawn on the c file. So he's aiming for bishop to b5 check. Also, if I play bishop to d7, I lose the b7 pawn. So maybe a6. Or knight to c6. Bishop b5, bishop d7. If he takes, I recapture with the light squared bishop, and I attack e4. Yes, I'll play knight to c6. There we go. Now if I castle, my rooks are connected, but you don't even need to castle in this kind of position. You can keep the king more centralized with king to e7. On a dark square, that's very good, and the rooks are connected. It's important to connect the rooks, but in endgames, when the queens are off the board, it's not necessarily required to castling. On the contrary, castling can actually move the king away from the center of the action, because in endgames, the king is a piece. He can join the fight. So he just played king to e2, and I'm going to play king to e7. And now it's tough for him because he'll have to justify being a pawn down. There's nothing for him. I'm going to play rook to d8 here. I'm challenging his rook's presence on the file. I can play bishop to e8 afterwards to offer an exchange of rooks. I exchange as many pieces as possible. And the closer we get to a king endgame, the more decisive the extra pawn on a will be. He plays king f1. So bishop e8. Bishop takes, I always recapture with the defender. But here, of course, the rooks are still on the board. Rook takes, bishop takes, and bishop recaptures with the attack on e4. He plays rook e1. Does knight d4 force exchanges? Knight takes, rook takes, bishop takes, but then he grabs b7. I'll probably play rook c8, because if my knight moves, there will also be pressure on the c-pawn. All right, rook c8. I can try to play b6 and then move my knight to a5. The rook won't be able to take on b7. The knight will attack the rook. I could even play knight a5 right away, actually. He plays c4. I'll first ask the question with a6. Bishop takes, bishop recaptures. He might be aiming for knight e5 to take the bishop on the light square and then follow up by capturing on b7. If knight e5, what will I play? He plays knight g5. He's attacking the h-pawn, but if he takes the h-pawn, I play f6, and his knight has no retreat square. I'm going to play rook d4. I'm putting pressure on c4. I know he can play c5. On knight takes h7, I play f6. There you go, he plays c5. Now, if I play h6, he goes back to f3. I can win this pawn. Rook takes, bishop takes, and I'm still defending b7. So h6. And now the rook attacks c5. The bishop protects b7. And I have two extra pawns and soon a third one. He plays knight d2. Bishop d5. That attacks the rook. But what's interesting is that the bishop dominates the knight. That is to say, on any squares where the knight would try to get back into the game, it could be exchanged. Now on b6. If he takes, rook takes, he pushes the pawn. But bishop takes, so on b6, what is he going to do? If I play c6, I take, I win a pawn. So b6. We're going to try to win another pawn. Maybe he can try to counterattack on rook a3, targeting the pawn on a6. He plays f3. Rook takes c5, and now 3 pawns up. The knight is still dominated. It's unable to get back into the game. He gets exchanged, so I play a5. And now the passed pawn on the a file that he kindly gave me in the opening is going to be decisive. The bishop controls the white square and the pawns the black squares. That's how you should try to play. It creates a barrier. He plays king to c2. So if I play a2, he comes to b2 and he'll block it. So I'm not going to play a2. I'll keep controlling the black square. His knight still can't move. What I'm going to do is use my majority of 4 pawns against 3 to try to create a passed pawn on the other wing. his king and knight are going to be overwhelmed between the blockade of the a3 pawn, the c5 pawn, and soon the appearance of a new passed pawn. So I play e5 with the idea of f5 then e4. So a 2, capture, capture. He plays knight to b1. So here he's trying to take on a 3. A 2, the knight moves and make a queen. A 2 is actually winning, it's immediately winning. Now it's pretty easy. If he captures, I recapture with the bishop, attacking both so he doesn't take. I play 4, preparing e3. He's going to be overwhelmed by the passed pawn and the majority. There you go, his king can't stop both. It's easy to make a queen. So now, obviously this video is aimed at less experienced players who want to know how to finish, but that's it, he resigns. And now I'm going to show you how dangerous his rook sacrifice in the opening was. Look, after e4 I played c5, b4, the Sicilian gambit, with the aim of diverting my pawn out of the center. I decide to take, he plays a 3, I decide to take again, and then he recaptures with the rook. Usually you recapture with the bishop or the knight, but he takes back with the rook. And he places his rook conspicuously in front of my bishop. So obviously it's like waving a red flag. You feel like pushing the pawn to attack the rook, and that's what I do. I play a 6 and go after his rook, and then he plays knight to c3. And here, in my opinion, you have to know how to hold back. Taking the rook is possible, but be careful, there could be danger. For example, after bishop takes, the bishop has a nice diagonal. The first mistake would be to play the pawn to d6, because then he can play knight to b5. He attacks the d6 pawn twice, and I have no way to defend it. And after that, when he takes the d6 pawn, he'll give check. That is, if I play knight to a7, he plays knight to p6 check. Either the king starts to wander off to d7, but then there will be knight to f3, and soon knight to e5. It's very dangerous for the king, or he comes to f8. But then look at the technique. Queen h5, that threatens mate, so we'll probably play g6. Queen f3, that threatens mate, so we can play f5. And now look at how he's going to play on the dark squares. Thanks to the absence of my dark squared bishop, queen c3 attacks the rook. But above all, queen f6 mate. If I play rook g8, queen f6 mate. So what can we do to save the rook? We could maybe try playing king g8, but now the dark square bishop will go to b2, and we get completely split open on the long dark diagonal with this threat of queen g7 mate. It's terrible. So already we know that d6 isn't possible. Let's imagine I play knight e7, knight b5, and of course here I can to castle. But then I have to accept that the bishop settles on d6 with possible threats of kd7, or that the knight settles on d6, which would paralyze my position to some extent. It's very unpleasant, this kind of position where my opponent will completely anchor themselves on the d6 square and paralyze my play. And here, if I play d5, we come back to the same ideas. Knight to d6, check. Either I play king to d7, but then my king goes wandering. Or king to f6, and still queen to h5 threatens mate. I don't want to play king to g6 because I'm really afraid of that diagonal. Let's imagine I play g6, but then I weaken all my dark squares. Queen to f3, threatening mate. But actually, the idea is to move to c3, f5, queen to c3, threatening queen to f6 mate. If the kvd moves, there will also be problems along the diagonal. The queen attacks the rook, and on king g8, bishop b2. And here, I obviously regret having given up my dark squared bishop for his rook in the opening. You see, it's this kind of position that I was afraid of. So he tried his trap, I didn't fall for it. And in the end, gradually and methodically, I was able to finish my development, win a pawn, then a second, then a third, and win the endgame calmly. I hope the game was instructive, or at least entertaining, as usual, and you can leave me likes, comments, share the video, or support the channel. Goodbye, everyone.